Okie dokie. Well, I have my dear brother Andrew here, which brings me so much joy. It is such a blessing to be part of this wider Vineyard family in Scotland. Sometimes we're tucked away on the west coast of Scotland and it can be easy to forget that we're part of this wider family. And it's so good to have these guys with us. Andrew's going to be preaching for us. I'm going to pray and then over to you. So Lord Jesus, thank you for Andrew. Thank you for the call you have on his life. Thank you for the encouragement and example him and Lorraine to us, having started Falkirk Vineyard and led it for the last, is it 10 years now? And how they have been such an example of godly leaders, visionary, kind, faith-filled. And thank you that they're here with us this morning. And I pray you just be speaking to him even as he speaks to us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Don. I barely recognised that person you described in the prayer there. I'm thinking, wow, was that me? Wow. So, Guy, absolute pleasure to be here. I'm here today with my wife Lorraine and our good friends Ryan and Nikki. Just before I get started, one of the joys that we get to being part of the Vineyard movement is when we come to other Vineyard churches. And we've never been to Inverclyde Vineyard before, but Inverclyde Vineyard's not been here very long. So, and we had a couple of years where we weren't allowed to come through anyway. But no, we just Lorraine and I really just want to just commend your leaders to you, Don and Abby. They are an amazing couple. It always amazes me when people plant churches and they give up a life and a community in another part of the country to move themselves to somewhere brand new. For what reason? Only because they've heard the call of God. So, I just want to commend Don and Abby to you, their faithfulness, their bravery. I think, Don, what you and Abby have done is like heroic. Leaving your home in Aberdeen and coming down and re-establishing your family and your life here. And they've done it for you guys. They've done it for you guys, and not just yous, but for all the people that are going to come to this church. And you guys are really attractive. Did you know that? I don't know if you've looked in the mirror this morning, but you are really attractive. I will. I was thinking particularly of Abby, obviously. But Nikki and I were just talking before the service started. We're commenting how friendly and how welcoming you guys are, and I believe it's something that the Lord, He's put a spirit of attraction in you guys, and the Lord is going to draw people towards you. Okay, that doesn't mean you don't have to work or do anything. You're not going to stand back, but God is going to draw people towards you, and it's going to be because of you. Now, we know it's because of Him, but it is because of you. The Lord chooses to work or do His work in us and through us. He doesn't do it in isolation. He chooses to do it in partnership. And I just want to encourage you all to be faithful, to keep showing up, because you don't want to not be here on the day that God does something spectacular. Right, so keep showing up, keep being here. We just want to bless you guys, and we bring you greetings from your family in Falkirk, who knows what they're doing this morning. We have got no clue. We've got no clue. And just very quickly as well, just to introduce Lorraine and I, along with Ryan and Nikki, really planted the church at Falkirk Vineyard. Ryan and Nikki have been our friends way before we were even part of Vineyard. Lorraine and I were youth leaders, and Nikki was in our youth. I know we don't even look that much far apart in age, as well. And then Ryan moved to Scotland from South Africa when he was 18. So as you can tell, looking at him, we've known him for a long, long time. But they are literally our best friends. They've seen the best of us and the worst of us, and our church. I think my talk's going to go to the side here. I just said, because I want to say something different. So, our church actually just began, really, we were part of Edinburgh Vineyard. It was called Almond Vineyard in Edinburgh. And Ricky and Ryan, you went there about 2005, I think, around that. And then Lorraine and I ended up going along there about a year or so later. So when we arrived at the vineyard in Edinburgh, Ryan and Nicky were established. Ryan was leading worship. They were doing you were doing kids church, I think. Well, you're always doing kids church, Nicky. Doing kids church, and they were well established in the church, and we kind of rocked up. And I think for all of us, for the four of us, we found a home there. It's often described when you come to Vineyard that Vineyard finds you. It's like this is where you've been yearning to be, even though you didn't realise it. And that was definitely our experience. Also, just to be part of a church where leaders make themselves vulnerable and don't elevate themselves above the people. That I'd maybe had some experience of that in the past, but just to see leaders being vulnerable and being in and amongst the people was incredible. But we were living in Falkirk, still do, and we were going to church in Edinburgh. And then, moving on a bit, we led a small group in our house, or sometimes in Ryan and Nicky's house. So Ryan and Nicky live in the same village as us. They actually live in the same street. Long story. But we were leading a small group in Falkirk, going to church in Edinburgh. But everyone in our group was from Falkirk. So people weren't travelling from other parts of the region, or that. Everyone is from Falkirk. And we kind of had this kind of sense of, like, why is that? Why are we meeting together as people from Falkirk in this local place, but on a Sunday we commute, whatever it was, 20-minute drive to the west side of Edinburgh? Because although we live where we are in Falkirk, we're on the east side, which is closer to Edinburgh. If you live in the west of Falkirk, you're a lot closer to Glasgow. But although we're close to the cities, there's not really any kind of association. We're a different region, different part of the country, and we soon realised that as we were connecting with our neighbours, getting to know people in our area, that as we were sharing life with people, sharing our faith and trying to love people as best as we could, there was no way that the people that were in our lives locally were going to come with us to Edinburgh to go to church, because it's only Christians that do that. It's only Christians that commute to churches outside their communities, right? And if you, and around here, and I know speaking to Don and Abby, if like you've got, Gourock is a different place from Greenock, right? You don't have to be far apart in terms of communities for communities to have separate identities, and we definitely had that. And really, the way our church came into being was Lorraine and I and Ryan and Nicky having conversations that went along the lines of, well, first of all, talking about how we're going to get our neighbours to church when it's in Edinburgh. So thank you very much. So that wasn't going to happen. And then we'd start having conversations like, what if we had a Vineyard church in Falkirk? Or what would it look like? And we started to have these conversations, like describing what our Vineyard church would look like, not thinking that we might actually be speaking out something that was going to happen. So even in our general conversation about this, it became prophetic. But I only know that with hindsight. At the time, we were just having a chat. And I remember one time Ryan and I were in our local pub. Not something we do that often, actually, but we were in our local pub, and we were talking about what our worship would be like in our church. So we'd moved on a wee bit. Okay, so imagine if we had a church, what the worship looked like. And I remember one of us, I think it might have been Ryan, saying that our worship will be banging. It's going to be like full on sort of thing, and it is. Ryan's amazing. He's led worship our whole history, and he's got a great team there, and it is actually banging, really good. But all that to say that in our journey towards planting a church and establishing a church, for us, it never felt like a call to church planting. It was like a dream, a desire that we started to speak out. And I just want to encourage you with that if God is if you're thinking about things and you have a desire for something, right, maybe consider that it's the Lord that's given you that. I think sometimes as Christians we expect that God's going to ask us to do things we don't like doing. Yeah? Do you know, have you ever considered that God might choose you to do something that you love? Does that not sound a bit more like Him? So if you have a desire, you have a dream, you have a passion, I would encourage you to pray into that, to talk about it, as we did, and see what happens. See what happens. Because sometimes it's the things that, the desires in our heart are quite often aligned with the Father's heart. And when that's the case, that's when He does things. The problem we have is, it's when we start to do things out of our own desire for our own benefit. But doesn't it say that I forgot the verse I was going to say. See, I'm off the cuff here now. Like, God grants for us the desires of our heart. That's the word I'm looking for, yeah? So, that doesn't mean we get what we want. It means that when our hearts are aligned with the Father, that He will give us those desires. So I just want to give you that as an encouragement this morning, right? You know, even though you're small in number, you can have a small number but a big heart. And you guys have got big hearts. Like, it's evident. It's just evident in the room, the atmosphere and the place and the way that you've welcomed us. And the Lord is going to do great things here. He's going to do great things here. And I would just encourage you to be present. Be present. I often, if I'm talking about faithfulness, we can spiritualize or be clever with a lot of the things that we believe in our faith. And one of those things is faithfulness. What does it mean to be faithful? And I've basically come to the conclusion that faithfulness literally just means showing up. Just show up. So your men's nights, your socials, your lunches, church on a Sunday, whatever else you're doing, show up. Because it's so encouraging for everyone else when you're here. And actually it can be really discouraging if you're not. So if you want to be encouraged, come to a place of encouragement. And if you want to encourage others, be present so you can encourage. That's really what faithfulness is. And we can do a big sermon and a big talk on what faithfulness is, but literally it means show up. And I don't say that as a harsh instruction, but it's just great to be around God's people. It's great to share what God's doing in our lives. It's great to speak into and bless and encourage each other. And I just want to say that, just keep going and doing that. Yeah, sorry, I've used about half my time there. So, and I think the other thing that the Lord is saying as well is about Don had spoke about your logo with the waves and kind of going with the flow of the river. And just another word I sense the Lord saying this morning is that He wants you to be active in the right things. To be active in the right things. So to be doing the things that really matter. And I think what that is that don't focus on what you don't have, but give attention to what you do have. Sorry, I'm just unpacking this kind of spontaneously here. And I think sometimes we look ahead to what we want things to be. And we kind of look ahead to that, but we actually miss what's happening in the present. I think it might actually been you, Don, that said to us the other week about we were talking about this in your house last week, was that God is never more present than He is right now. Like, so now, in this moment, because the past is behind and the future is yet to come. So God is most present in the now. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that don't get overly focused on what might be or what could be, or even what will be, and miss out on what God's doing right now. Right? There's great blessing in what you're doing in this moment. And it's good to dream, and it's good to make plans, and it's good to seek God's will for our lives. But often what we do is we're looking for the will of God in our lives, and we're wanting to hear, what is God calling for my life? And really what we're looking for there is to get our fortunes told. Right? We want to know what our future is. But actually your future is a product of your present. Right? So you can't have a future unless you have a present. You understand? Right? Does that make sense? So your future will become your present at some point. It will be the thing that's actually happening. And God is doing things right now. And what you're doing now is the most important thing to God in this moment. And I have this philosophy, I guess, I try to live by, which is that if I want God to do something in my life, then I have to say yes to what He's saying now. When we're looking at what is the calling in our life, God doesn't just say that you're going to, so He doesn't just say to Dawn and Abby, guys, you're going to be church planters, and then they immediately plant a church in that moment. That there's a journey towards that. And if there's a call in your life that God has for you to do, don't think it may happen today or tomorrow. What God is saying to you in that moment is like, so if you're going to be a worship leader, hang out with worship leaders, hang out with guys that do worship. Look for people that have got hearts that are drawn towards worship, and worship yourself. And then as you are obedient in that, God will develop your calling in you. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and I call it like your calling arrives as you stack up your yeses. So it's like yes to this thing, then yes to the next thing. And that's been our journey in church planting. We had a small group, and it grew, and then there was 2 small groups, and then at some point it was 3. I can never remember the whole timeline with this, but when we planted our church, we had 3 small groups and about 30 people. Now, we didn't really realize we're planting a church. We were just saying yes. And all through that journey, Lorraine and I, and probably Ryan and Nikki as well, were thinking, when's the leader going to arrive? When's the minister arrive? And where's the pastor? Right? You know, who's going to do this? And we went even to the point that when we planted the church, Lorraine and I wouldn't call ourselves pastors. I remember on our website, our handle of our job was senior leaders, because I just couldn't compute the fact that we would be pastors, like we would actually lead this thing. And then there just came a point, I remember thinking, oh, it's us. It's us. You think you're not qualified for it, but actually all you're doing is leading the thing, or we just kept leading the thing we had. And then as that thing grows, you lead that, and then you lead that. And I always used to, well, COVID kind of blew this theory a wee bit because people disappeared. But I used to say that every month I lead the biggest church I've ever led, because the church was growing. And if my dream was to lead a church at 1,000 people, I would never have believed it. But I've led a church of 10, and I've led a church of 20, and I've led a church of 30, and you just keep going and going, and you say yes to that, and you be obedient in that, and then God brings the growth and the multiplication. And you've got on your vision statement here, your vision is to be a multiplying and compassionate church. You know, compassion's a good way to multiply, because people are attracted to compassion. And how do not? Because Jesus was the most compassionate human that ever walked the earth. But if you're going to be a multiplying church, if that's part of your vision, then I guess what I'm trying to say is like you be obedient and be present in the moment and watch what God will do. But I just want to reiterate, you guys are attractive. You're attractive people, and it's because of the Spirit that is within you. And I really believe that God's going to do amazing things here. Let me just see if I can pull something that I've actually planned to say out of this for the last 5 minutes. I really just had a story here. I was going to talk about Barnabas and how Barnabas was an incredible guy. I don't know how much you know about him in the book of Acts, but without Barnabas, there might not have been a church. Right? He was that critical. So the church was birthed at Pentecost, as we know, as a result of Peter's incredible teaching. But then they had a problem in the early church because this guy, Paul, come on the scene. And Paul was a bit of a rogue, or Saul, as he was originally. I'm sure you know the story. But Paul/Saul was he was a zealot before he met Jesus. And, he was persecuting the church, and he was responsible for trying to destroy the church. And and he did that on behalf of the Jewish leaders at the time. So Paul thought he was serving God when he was doing this. But he was a threat to the church, and he was responsible for the deaths of many Christians at the time. But Barnabas had heard that Paul had come to faith, and he went looking for him, and he found him in all over my notes here. So he found him, I think, in Antioch. That could be wrong, but he listened to him preach and decided, after hearing him preach and watching him at work, that this guy truly had met with Jesus, and he was going to be a big player in the early part of the church. So Barnabas brings Saul/Paul to Jerusalem to meet the other apostles and the other church leaders there, and they don't want anything to do with him, right? Because this guy's a killer. This guy's his mission is to destroy the church. And Barnabas brings them and convinces them to give Paul a shot. And thankfully he did that, because, well, first of all, we wouldn't really have a New Testament if Barnabas hadn't done that, because Paul wrote most of it. And also Barnabas and Paul, but Paul particularly, were responsible for planting churches across many, many regions. And I guess what I really kind of wanted to talk about this morning about that was that Barnabas, he's known as being an encourager, he's known as being a missionary, but I think Barnabas' biggest gifting and most worthwhile trait that we can try and emulate is that he was a risk taker. But particularly he took risks on people. He took a massive risk with Paul, and he took a massive risk with a guy called John Mark as well, which I was going to speak about. But John Mark was a guy who had let Paul down on a missionary trip. He walked away. Paul actually says that John Mark deserted him. Barnabas and Paul fell out about it, because Barnabas thought that John Mark, even though he'd had a bit of a turbulent past and was slacking in commitment, Barnabas saw something in him, and he decided that John Mark was someone who should be on the missionary journeys with him. And Paul said no, and then Barnabas and Paul went their separate ways. But later on, we see Paul reconciling that. He writes to Timothy, and he talks about the next trip that he's going on, and he asks Timothy to send a few people to help him. And he said, and also, can you send John Mark, because he'll be useful to me in my ministry. And I thought it's really interesting how Barnabas took a risk on Paul, he took a risk on John Mark, and how significant those risks, on taking risks on people, are. Because Barnabas took the risk with Paul, and the rest is history. We know what Paul did. He took a risk with John Mark, and John Mark went with Paul and spent a lot of time with Peter as well, doing missionary work and spreading the gospel. And John Mark was actually the guy who wrote Mark's gospel. The point of me going to talk about that today was that you guys are early in your journey, and you're going to have to take a lot of risks with people. I remember being told early in our journey that you can only use what you have. And you might not have people, you might find that you're in your church, You'll not all be fully equipped to fulfill a role, but the fact that you're here means that you're going to have to. You're going to have to do things, maybe not that your heart's desire is for, but where your need is. And I would just encourage you to say, don't go after the desire, go after the need. The need is the thing where God is at work. And, you know, Dawn, for you and Abby, like, just take a risk. Just put people, look at, you've got great people here, but, you know, you do. But you might have someone who can play guitar, but they're not the best singer, but they might have to be your worship leader. You know what I mean? I don't know if you do. You know, you might not have the most tech-savvy guy in the world, right? You know, but you use what you have, and I really believe that God will bless that. That God will bless that. And then finally, as I close this non-sermon, for some of you today, I sense that the Lord wants you to take a risk on yourself. Quite often we have found that when we are asking people to do things, that the natural reaction of a lot of people is to tell you why they can't do something. It might be because they're overcommitted with other things, or they just think they're not able, or not talented enough, or not skilled in that area. But if there's something that needs done and you see a gap, then why don't you just step into it? Just take a risk on yourself. You might think, I'm not very outgoing. I couldn't be in the welcome team. I couldn't welcome people. But I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert, and I'm talking in front of you. Heard somebody describing being a church leader as being an introvert doing the job of an extrovert. You know, introverts can be some of the most welcoming and kind people and attractive people around, because there'll be a natural humility when you're dealing with people. But take a risk on yourself. Amen. Sorry, Dawn, that wasn't quite what I planned, but we're on it. I think we're on it. God is at work here. There's a spirit in this room today. God is at work here. And we're going to take communion just in a second. And again, we can talk at length about the meaning of communion and the Lord's Supper, and it's great to do that. But foundationally, what this is about people being together and coming together with the Lord. You know, we've come here today. Why? Because of Jesus. And when we take this bread and we take this wine, we are affirming and recognizing that is the foundational purpose of our existence, but also of our community, of the church. And we are doing something here that was practiced 2,000 years ago, has continually happened in one form or another in churches of all shapes, sizes, denominations, flavors, theology. This actually is a thread that goes through pretty much every theology of every church, and we're a part of that. And as we come together to do this, we remember why we exist, we remember who allows us to exist, and we remember the life and the privilege that we have because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So let me